Today on Food for Thought, I'm looking back at some of my favorite recipes to satisfy your sweet tooth. First up, it's a French twist on an apple pie with a Tarte Tatin. Then I bake up a batch of my brown butter walnut brownies, followed by my favorite sweet and savory snack, pig candy. And finally, a dairy-free Panna Cotta made with homemade pecan milk. I can't wait to get started on these sweet treats. If you're like me, sometimes you just need a little something sweet. And I've got 4 delicious dishes to satisfy your craving, starting with a twist on an American classic.
Who doesn't love an apple pie? Well, today I'm doing a French version of it. It's called a Tarte Tatin, and basically it's just an upside down apple tart. It looks beautiful on a platter and is really simple to make. So first, I have 8 apples here, but it basically depends on the size of your pan and how you put the apples in them. So to start, I'm going to be peeling and coring my apples. And for coring, it's pretty simple. I just use a melon baller. You don't really have to buy an apple corer for this. The apple is really key. You want to make sure you have a really high acid, full flavor, sturdy apple that'll stand up to baking. So an example of that would be Galas or Pink Ladies, but if you're not sure, just ask your grocer and they'll totally help you out. Okay, I'm all set to get started with prepping my skillet. And this is very simple, and this is why I love this recipe, is because it takes like 2 seconds to whip up. I have my 1 stick of butter, and I am just going to smush it in the bottom of the pan. And you just want to coat the entire pan as best as you can. And the reason why it's so important for me to be using cast iron or anything that distributes heat really well is because I am making a caramel sauce with my apples and my butter and my sugar. Great. And next, I'm going to combine a little bit of vanilla with my sugar and then sprinkle it all over. You want to try to keep it as even as possible because you don't want pockets with a lot of sugar, some with less, because then you might burn quicker in one corner. So this is where you get to get a little bit creative, and you can kind of have fun with how you put your apples in. I like to do it really simple. I just line them up like this, and look, that's the butter and sugar working. You don't have to worry about it. It's gonna stay put. And I just make them hug each other, like so, going all the way around the pan. Love it, how pretty is that? But there's a million different ways you can do this. You can go the opposite direction, you can do diagonal, tons of fun stuff. So I'm gonna take this and put this on the stove top, and I'm gonna be bubbling this. So I wanna create a caramel sauce at the base. So onto the stove this goes. So my apples are bubbling away, and what's happened is the juices from the apples have come down into the bottom of the pan and started mingling with all the sugar and the butter, basically creating a super delicious caramel sauce. So when I flip this upside down, all of that sauce is gonna cover the entire tart, really golden brown, gooey, and delicious. So these look about ready, so I've turned off my heat. I'm gonna let them cool down a little bit so when I add my pie dough, nothing will melt, and I can then stick it right in the oven. So my dough has been chilling in the fridge for about 30 minutes, so it's ready to roll out. First, I'm gonna dust a little bit of flour onto my surface just so it doesn't stick. And I wanna roll this out about 1/4 inch thick, but basically just a little bit larger than the skillet. Well, this definitely looks ready to go. And just for easiness, I'm gonna roll it onto my rolling pin, and it's ready to go, easy transportation to put onto my Tarte Tatin. So I've let my skillet cool down just a little bit so I don't burn my fingers when I work with the dough. So I'm gonna roll my dough out, just over the skillet like so, and working really quickly, I'm just gonna roll in, pressing in so it's inside here. This is so that when it bakes, all of the juices are collected. You can get fancy with it, but I like it being kind of rustic, so I'm just pressing and twisting as I go. Great, so now I'm gonna tuck it into the oven and bake it for a while. So my Tarte Tatin is out of the oven, and I've let it cool somewhat so it'll still unmold. You're gonna take your plate, put it on top, using both hands and your thumbs to keep it sturdy. You're just gonna say a prayer and then flip it. All right, let's see how it turned out. Ooh, it looks good. You can see all of that work in terms of putting the apples in order. It has such a big wow factor. It looks gorgeous.
And it tastes even better. Coming up next on the best of sweet treats, I'm baking up a batch of delicious brown butter walnut brownies, so stay tuned. Who doesn't love chocolate? Well, lucky for me, my friend Jonathan is a chocolatier. He's given me some gourmet chocolate that will be perfect for my next recipe.
So now I'm going to make my brown butter walnut brownies. And the big thing here is the brown butter. I love it with chocolate. It's just really nutty and kind of sweet and adds this really interesting flavor to it, and it goes great with walnuts. First, I'm going to sift together all of my dry ingredients, starting with the flour. And the reason why I do this is because you want to have a really consistent texture and make sure everything is fully integrated so you don't get any clumps of anything. Next, I'm going to add my cinnamon for a little bit of flavor, really nice spice, and cinnamon and walnuts are great together. Cayenne pepper for a little bit of heat. I love heat with my chocolate, so that's going in. A little bit of cocoa powder because it gives it a really rich sort of deep flavor and it goes great with the melted chocolate. So I'm just going to hit this like so. And if you have a traditional sifter, you can totally use that too. So my dry ingredients are ready to go. I'm now going to go get my wet ingredients ready. And the reason why I'm keeping them separate from the beginning is because I'm going to be alternating them later in the recipe. And that's just to make sure they have a really even, beautiful texture. So I'm using a bain-marie, which sounds super fancy and complicated, but it's really simple. It's basically a double boiler, which is just a bowl over simmering water, and this makes sure that chocolate doesn't burn. So now I'm going to melt down some of the beautiful chocolate that Jonathan gave me. And next, I'm going to add coffee. And this is just coffee left over from my pot this morning, but what it ends up doing is it really just brings out that chocolate flavor. It is just a perfect marriage. Like chocolate with vanilla, chocolate and coffee were just meant to happen. So in it goes. Well, I'm just gonna let that simmer and bubble and come together until everything is melted, and then stir it so it's really consistent and just has come together. So now I'm going to make my brown butter, and all that is melted butter, and you let it melt until all of the fat solids, it's all of the white bits, turn a beautiful golden brown. And the other key here is you want to use unsalted butter, not salted. Salted butter will burn, so you want to use unsalted. You basically want to wait until you get that beautiful scent of nuttiness. It should be a little bit golden brown and really nutty, and that's the key. It's nutty, not burnt. So now my butter is perfectly browned and it smells ridiculous. So I'm just gonna add this to our melted chocolate and coffee and mix them until they're blended together. My wet ingredients are totally done, and I'm gonna start mixing my brownies. So to start, I'm going to cream together my eggs and sugar. This is gonna be the base and kind of what everything clings to. So first goes in the sugar, and I'm just gonna pop this into my mixer. So I'm just gonna mix this really quickly, just so that there aren't any clumps of one sugar and the other sugar. And then I'm gonna start putting in one egg at a time. And the important thing here is you want the first egg to always fully integrate, and each egg after that as well. And that's to ensure that everything's really consistent and you have a really nice even texture. So that's perfectly mixed together, and I'm now gonna move on to adding my wet and dry ingredients. So similar to the eggs, I'm gonna wait until everything just fully gets coated so it really mixes in there. Good, that looks good. I'm gonna add a little bit of my wet ingredients. The reason why I'm alternating wet to dry is because you wanna have a really consistent texture when you're baking. If you don't, you're gonna get weird little, dry pockets, wet pockets. You're gonna have a very inconsistent brownie, and that is not a good thing. So the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit of vanilla extract because, like I said, vanilla and chocolate are beautiful together. I'm gonna mix it so it's fully blended. And now I'm gonna add chocolate chips because there's nothing like biting into a nice fudgy brownie and getting a pop of liquid chocolate. And I'm just gonna stir this by hand because I don't need to overmix it. Next, I'm going to pour this into a greased and floured baking dish. And the batter is a little bit liquidy, but the nice thing is that it bakes up really fudgy and dense. So the last step are putting the walnuts right on top, and I like using whole walnuts because they look beautiful on top of the brownie, really sophisticated when it comes right out of the oven.
And after a while, these have baked up beautifully. I can't wait to dig into these moist and delicious treats. Up next, I've got an irresistible sweet and savory snack with just 3 ingredients. And did I mention one of them is bacon? My next treat is sweet, savory, and super simple to make. This crowd-pleasing snack will satisfy any craving and is a personal favorite: pig candy.
3 ingredients, barely any time, and delicious results. All I have here is my bacon, some cayenne pepper for a little bit of heat, and brown sugar for that delicious, almost mapley sugar taste. So first thing, I'm gonna add my cayenne pepper to my brown sugar. And this is totally personal taste here. I love spicy, especially with something like this little snack. So I'm just gonna mix these together. Well, that looks great. So now I'm gonna get started on my bacon. And I have a baking sheet here covered in aluminum foil, and it has a cooling rack in it. And the idea here is less mess. This makes a big mess if you just put it right in. So I like the aluminum foil because all I have to do is crumble my mess and it's gone. And then the cooling rack acts as a way to elevate the bacon so it doesn't cook in its own fat. So you get a flatter, straighter bacon, and it's much cleaner. So I'm gonna lay my bacon horizontally across my cooling rack. And the idea here is it's not gonna slip through any of the cracks. And this bacon shrinks up really easily. So this entire cooling rack is good for maybe 4 people as a really great party snack. So now I'm going to sprinkle my sugar mixture onto my bacon. And I'm gonna be using a lot because it melts off, a lot of it just falls off the bacon. So go ahead and be really generous. So now I'm gonna press down my sugar just to make sure it's nice and stuck to the bacon. I'm gonna pop this in the oven, and you'll notice I saved half of my sugar mixture because I'm gonna flip my bacon once it's partially cooked and add a little bit more before it's done.
My bacon has been in the oven and is fully cooked. I'm going to pull it out and let it cool. Then I'm going to snip my pig candy into bite-sized pieces.
And when I say I'm going to snip my pig candy, I mean it. I'm using scissors and snipping it into tiny pieces. And you want to let your pig candy cool because then it'll become nice and stiff and it'll be really easy to snip up. If it's straight from the oven, it'll be a little too warm and kind of hard to break up. I'm using scissors instead of a knife because this way I don't have to press one side of the pig candy into it and then lose all the great sugar on one side. Also, it's just way easier. So I like to snip them to just about 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch pieces, just big enough for you to have a little nibble. The great thing about these little bites is you can double, you can triple the recipe if you're making them for a big party, because these are just meant to be little snacks. They're just 1 or 2 bites at most, and they're great to have when you're hosting friends. And I mean, who doesn't want candied bacon? It's candied bacon. So these look great. I'm just gonna finish it with a little sprinkling of brown sugar and some cayenne pepper for a bit of color. Just a pinch, because this is hot stuff.
There's only one thing left to do. Give it a taste.
Oh my goodness, this is so tasty.
Don't go anywhere because I've still got one more sweet treat up my sleeve, a decadent and dairy-free Panna Cotta, right after this. Whether you are lactose intolerant or just looking for a great dairy-free dessert, this pecan milk panna cotta is simple to make and so delicious.
So the base of my panna cotta is a really rich pecan milk. And the fun thing here is if you just take away some of the sweetener and add a little more water, you have a great pecan milk that you can eat with cereal or add to your coffee in the morning. But for me, this is a dessert, so it's gonna be pumped up just a little bit. So I start with my pecans, and I just toss them straight into the blender. So the pecans are gonna be making the milk of this dish. And then my sugar. A little bit of cinnamon for flavor, and just a hit of nutmeg, a little bit of vanilla extract, And now for a creamy factor, a little bit of coconut oil. This really kind of adds a nice sort of emulsified texture to it. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of water just to get it going. And now just a little bit of agave nectar. And agave is just a natural sweetener. It has a flavor almost like liquid brown sugar and maple syrup. It's quite sweet and has a really lovely round flavor to it. So that goes right in. And I like to mix in batches because it makes for a much smoother pecan milk. Great, so I'm just gonna let this blend and I'll pour my water. It looks beautiful, it's so frothy. I'm gonna have a taste just to see if I need to make any adjustments. That's really good. It's a little on the sweet side, but it's making up the core of my dessert, so I need it to be. So now I'm gonna strain my pecan milk just to get all of those pecan skins and other particles out of the way. I want it really smooth for my panna cotta. Well, I think I've strained it as much as I can, so I'm gonna take this to the back, simmer it for a little bit, and add a tiny bit of gelatin just to set it up. So to turn my pecan milk into a panna cotta, I need to add gelatin. It gives it a really luxurious texture, really thick and kind of silky. So I'm just gonna whisk this in just to make sure that it's perfectly smooth. You don't want any gelatin clumps. Great, I think this is ready to put in some ramekins. My pecan milk has simmered. I'm now going to pour it into my little greased ramekins. These look great. I'm gonna take them into my fridge and I'm gonna check on them in a couple of hours. So while my panna cotta is setting, I'm gonna get started on my caramelized pears and caramel pear sauce. The great thing about the caramelized pears is you can add them to any dessert and all of a sudden you have a really impressive dessert. And it's so simple to do as well. I'm gonna start by peeling, coring, and slicing up my pears. I'm now gonna transfer them to an oven-safe baking dish. And pears give a lot of juice when you roast them, so that's gonna work really well to help caramelize them. And now I'm gonna sprinkle it with a little bit of sugar that I've put some vanilla bean into. So it's gonna give it a really beautiful vanilla flavor. As the pears roast, the sugar is gonna melt and caramelize down. It'll go so well with my panna cotta. And I mean, how easy is that? It's just sugar and pears. It's so simple and so delicious. I'll stick these in the oven for about an hour, and in the meantime, get started on my last ingredient. So to make my dairy-free caramel sauce, I'm doing a dry caramel, which all that means is I'm putting sugar straight into the pot, heating it, and waiting until it starts to melt and caramelize all on its own. I'm gonna swirl it around just to make sure nothing gets burnt, and then I'm gonna add pear juice that has a lot of sugar in it already, so it's gonna create a really beautiful sauce. You can see it's starting to get a little bit wet. Nothing coloring is happening, but you can see it's starting to moisten and stick to the bottom of the pan. It's been 3 minutes and I think we're just about there. It's turning a really beautiful sort of deep caramel color. So now that it's fully liquefied, I'm going to add my pear juice, and it's gonna splatter just a little bit, so be warned. I'm just gonna stir it, and right now you'll see that the sugar has kind of hardened because the pear juice is not as hot as it is, but it'll basically go back into itself. You just have to stir it for a couple of minutes. So the caramel has dissolved back into the juice, and I'm gonna let it reduce just a little bit. All reduction means is that some of the water is evaporating out of whatever I'm trying to reduce. So I'm trying to just thicken it a little bit. And it looks just about there, so I'm gonna turn off the heat, and I'm gonna add my vanilla. I'd say about a teaspoon's fine. Well, this looks great. I'm gonna take it off and let it cool. So my pears are out of the oven and my panna cottas are set, so I'm gonna start putting this whole dish together. So first I'm gonna unmold my panna cotta. And all I'm gonna do, since these are already greased, is just run a butter knife right around the edge. Really clean. Flip a plate upside down. Flip this and cross my fingers. There we go. perfectly set. Now all I have to do is put my other ingredients on it and it's ready to go. So I'm going to start with my pears. Perfect, and so now I'm gonna add a little bit of the caramel sauce, just around the whole thing. So I'm gonna give it a try. That is so delicious. Super rich, really creamy, very luxurious, and total proof that you can be dairy-free and still enjoy beautiful desserts.
I hope you had as much fun as I did looking back at these sweet treats.
See you again for another episode of Food for Thought next week.
Closed captioning and other promotional consideration is provided by